Hi, everybody. Good morning. This is Ross Garrett speaking. We're going to be getting started with the webinar in just a couple of minutes. We'd like to give folks a little bit of time past the top of the hour just to get situated. So bear with us, and we'll be starting in about 90 seconds. Thank you. Okay, everybody. Welcome to our State of API Integration webinar for the 2019 edition of our report. This is the third year we've been publishing this report here at Cloud Elements, and so as has become tradition, we have a short webinar to help launch the report, walk through some of the key findings, and invite some of our contributors to join us and walk through the key sections of content that they've helped us put together. Today, we'll be, as I said, walking through the report, sharing some of the findings, but as usual, I just want everybody that you can ask us questions. There is a questions tab in the GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to submit your questions there. I'll try to answer some of those as we go through the respective sections of today's agenda, and anything that we don't cover during, we'll try and cover as we wrap up at the end. Of course, the slides and the recording will be shared with all of you once we're done here today. And please engage with us, the hashtag State of API Integration, or any of the contributors that are going to be speaking on the webinar with me today. So with that, I'm going to move straight into introducing those speakers. My name is Ross Garrett. I run the product organization here at Cloud Elements. And with me today, it's kind of a cast of characters that I've worked very closely with over the past few years. So I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, starting with Shelby Switzer.
Thanks, Ross. I currently work as a writer and an activist in communities, helping communities and local governments launch API programs, better understand the value of APIs, and better digital infrastructure for residents and citizens and people in their communities. In the past, I've worked both in healthcare and the Internet of Things. Most recently, I was leading out the API and integrations program at a healthcare technology company based in the US in New York City. And we had a variety of integrations. We worked with payers and providers and across the entire healthcare landscape. We had a number of different integrations and APIs with that company.
Awesome. Thanks, Shelby, and thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. Next up is Mike.
Hi, yeah, this is Mike Amundsen. Good to hear your voice, Ross, and I'm really happy to be here. I work as a speaker and author on APIs and API design and technology. I'm currently traveling around the world, listening to companies, hearing what enterprises are dealing with. It was really a great pleasure to contribute to this report, and I'm currently working on a book on building and designing APIs with pragmatic publishing that will be out later this year.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. It's really great to have you. And then Mehdi.
Yes, hello, Ross. Hello, everybody. My name is Mehdi Medjawi. I've been the founder of API Days conferences. It's the main series of technical and business conferences about APIs, API integration, API monetization, or API management. I've been also the founder of OAuth.io, an authorization and security company that has been acquired in 2017. And I'm also like giving some consultancy on API governance and API management, right? And I've just been also part of a European project about monetization of public sector APIs, where I'm glad to work with Shelby on this too, right? So yeah, really glad to be here.
Awesome, thanks, Mehdi, and welcome everyone. Just to sort of kick us off then, I'm going to provide a little bit of context about the report and the process we go through to get here. This webinar today will be pretty conversational. We are going to ask the various speakers a few questions. I hope they chime in with provocative things to say. And if you've got tough questions for us, as I said at the beginning, don't forget to submit those in the questions panel. So the report itself, this is the third iteration of our State of API Integration report. It's been growing really fast. You know, we have been really fortunate to have so much engagement from you guys, the API providers and practitioners out there. And it really all starts with a survey of developers and practitioners. We've surveyed hundreds of developers for this year's report. Across 50 countries on 6 continents, and it's definitely the biggest report we've produced thus far in terms of engagement and collaboration with each of you. So thank you for those that have completed the survey. We run the survey over a period of months in late 2018. And so we really appreciate all of the feedback that we've collected. And it was from a wide range of companies. From quite small organizations, less than $100,000 in revenue, to large multinationals of north of $25 billion in revenue, and a nice spread of personas as well. So I've talked about practitioners and developers. We've also got CTOs, CIOs, product managers, and not to forget our friends in sales and marketing as well. So it's a pretty big spread. And you know, collectively, these organizations that have participated in the survey have spent over 200,000 development days building over 4,500 integrations, API integrations in 2018. So they're really representative of users, and that's the feedback that we're trying to achieve. So thank you to everybody. We couldn't possibly do it without you. As I look at the stats we collected through the process this year, the one thing that's kind of become very clear to me is that we're kind of in this mode of more. There's been more APIs, more apps, more integrations, and with that, of course, comes more challenges and more opportunities. We've seen you know, the number of integrations that people are building growing on average from 11.5 to 18, and so this is a continued trend upwards. When we ask people, you know, what they're doing, it is typically we now have more APIs and more requirements and more products. Mehdi, you've been like talking to a lot of businesses over the past few years. How are they dealing with this increased need and demand for APIs?
So with this increased demand, let's say that companies are facing a different level of strategy there. First, internally, they have to understand what API management is, because now they need to, sometimes for their own demand or for their customer demand, they need to produce more APIs, more services and more APIs to deliver it with the right interface. So they need to adopt, let's say, an API mindset, an API culture internally. This is a little bit what we wrote in the book with Mike Amundsen called Continuous API Management, and other Eric Wilde and Ronnie Mitra. So really this idea of going from zero to few to many APIs internally to be able to deliver them to internal teams or maybe to other. On the integration side, now companies need to decide really what do they need to integrate, what do they build on top of other third parties. So there is an integration strategy that needs to be thought about. What do I do myself with my internal services and API? What do I integrate from others? So the integration strategy, the IT procurement kind of in the world of services is also there. and also the public strategy, right? What do I expose to other? If my customer, if my partners wants to integrate with me now, right? What do I expose? So it's facing this increasing demand, there is a lot of culture and a lot of let's say governance that companies are implementing directly internally, and that's the big change. It's a cultural change first, and then the tooling will help this culture.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense for sure, and I think it also speaks to the next question that we've typically asked the survey respondents. What is it that you're actually building with APIs? How is that changing over time? It's perhaps not that shocking for us to see that B2B products or B2B integration itself is one of the largest pieces of the puzzle for organizations. But there's definitely continued growth in B2C, B2E, business to employee applications, as well as growth in the world of IoT. Mike, I think this gives a great prelude into the content that you've produced on API design. How are you seeing API design differ between use cases here?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and I can pick up a lot on what Mehdi was also saying. It turns out when you're doing these B2B integrations, you really need to understand that your job is to integrate with a third party, and often you don't control that third party. You don't tell Salesforce or SAP or anybody else how to design their APIs. So you have to figure out how to design for B2B integration. And the design strategy and the design process and sort of the design value is very different than when you're trying to work on employee productivity or just IoT applications or just general consumer products. So it turns out a pattern in design is knowing who your audience is, knowing what their problem is, to use the sort of the Clayton Christensen jobs to be done. What is their jobs to be done? And using a design strategy and process that matches your consumer. And understanding now, as you point out in your stats, we're now doing more and more integrations. That's a different kind of consumer than B2C or B2E or even just general mobile apps. So adopting the right design strategy is going to be really critical for successful integrations.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think looking at our own customer base here at Cloud Elements, obviously we see a greater percentage of those B2B integration problems, right? And as you describe it, that notion of you can't go ask Salesforce to change their API just to make your life easier. You have to think about how you're going to handle the nuance and complexity that exists across a whole bunch of different providers that you perhaps need to work with. Looking, a little bit, in last year's report, we made a lot from this notion of building a platform versus building a product. And we discussed this as whether this could be the right strategy for your business, how you can get benefit from the network effects of a platform strategy. We asked the same sort of questions this year and got many of the same answers. Ultimately, API providers are looking for ways to drive adoption of their APIs and reach a greater addressable market for their products and services. The most interesting stat when we asked this for me was understanding that almost half of those we asked are trying to integrate with partners. So that's a very good fit for what we learned in the last slide, where greater than 50% are in the world of B2B integration, and almost half, when asked, are trying to increase, for example, customer retention, stickiness, etc., by providing that integration to partners. The other piece that's perhaps interesting here is looking at the business models for APIs, both access and integration services. We asked, do you simply charge for your APIs, and we're seeing much the same results year over year. But there's a whole bunch of other business models, revenue models that exist around APIs and integration. Mehdi, I think you would be able to give us some good insight here on how people should think about their APIs beyond simply charging for them.
So there is a sentence that I really like. It's from Stephen Wilmot, one of the thought leaders of the API space, right? And he said that don't think what is the best business model for your API, but what are the best API for your business model. And I think this is the most enlightening sentence and phrase about API monetization, let's say. Of course, a lot of companies monetize APIs directly, right? When their only product is an API, right? In payments, in telecom, in emailing, in anything mostly transactional. Yeah, the API monetization directly, charging for API access is the way to go. For data, it may make sense to monetize directly data, right? Because people have access to some value, some insights that the data is delivering. But let's say with data, we begin to have other type of strategies, which Ray Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, called a blitz scaling, right? Because sometimes being integrated with another partner is a lot stronger position than just having some thousands or dozens of thousands of dollars, right, for API monetization. So the fact that you will totally reduce the friction of being integrated will be a middle term or long term advantage compared to, let's say, short term monetization. So you always have to think, okay, money, which is the end goal of any business, right? But you also need to think about position, right? You need to about position, and sometimes being integrated, like company like Salesforce or many others, with 100, 200, 500 people, you will not sell just a product, you will not sell a platform, but you will sell an ecosystem that can completely enhance the product. So a strong integration strategy may not be directly based on API charging API access, but sometimes you need to think ahead about what's by letting other integrate your API and integrating your service with APIs. What position do you have? What goodwill, what value that brings to your platform or your ecosystem? So it's always a hard decision to make, but sometimes a free API like Facebook, or let's say APIs that are really cheap to use, but can lead to really strong position at the end. Like Salesforce is one great example where the API is not a product, the API supports the product. And when the API supports the product, it means that you can monetize later by selling more products, right? Because people are not buying a CRM anymore. They are buying a complete business management solution. And that makes the whole difference. So the integration strategy needs to tell you sometimes you need to monetization like will be just harvesting like on the short term, but you can harvest lot more if you think more ecosystem.
Yeah, I agree entirely. There are so many options here, and it's really about enabling users to do more with your products and services. I think the next topic, kind of changing gears a little bit from this sort of business reasons of APIs and thinking more about the developer pains and challenges. The next topic I wanted to cover is in the realm of data or API standards. I really would like to double click into this a little bit. There's perhaps benefits here, right? Even tying back to the notion of the network effect. If you can allow more people to lean on and leverage your APIs because they're familiar, standardized things, you can create that network effect around your products. Shelby, you've done a whole bunch of work here. Understanding, especially in the healthcare industry, the pros and cons of APIs or data standards. What do you see as the benefits or drawbacks for developers in this space?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And just for some more context as well, I have a lot of experience working both in healthcare specific standards with HL7 and FHIR, as well as vendors in that space trying to create their own standards or deciding that the standards that existed weren't good enough. And I also currently work with a standard called the Human Services Data Specification, which also has an API specification. It's led by the Open Referral Project. This touches the healthcare space as well. And what we've seen both in terms of trying to implement standards and get people on board with standards is that from a consumer perspective, there's a lot of benefits. Whenever you create a common language, you increase the number of people that you can talk to. It lowers the barriers to entry and to integrating inside of an industry. It lowers the barriers for innovation. And it also helps you when you're building partnerships with other organizations and software systems, if you have basically a contract that's already written that you can point to and say, you know, this is our data contract. These are the things that we're going to go ahead and abide by. It removes a lot of the bureaucracy, because if you've ever worked in technology, or I guess in any space, you know that people is always the hardest part. And if you can make some of that, the people part and the negotiation easier through the use of standards, it's incredibly helpful. One of the drawbacks, though, is that, you know, standards can be complex. So in the pursuit of covering all your bases and making a standard that can work for everyone, standards can just grow exponentially in complexity and actually reduce some of the benefit of having that common language. Another aspect that can be really difficult with implementing standards is from the provider side. You know, if you're trying to just get out an MVP, or this is your first time building an API, implementing a standards compliant API or data model can be really difficult and feel like a lot of work that's not going to pay off. And that's why I think that tooling is so important, not just tooling from a consuming the standards point of view, but tooling to help building APIs that match standards is incredibly important. It's something we need to see more of.
Yeah, and it seems that like developers are actually seeking out more standards. I wanted to reference this stat from our friends at SmartBear at this point, because they asked something very similar and found some very similar results to us in their survey this year, that 56% or 58%, sorry, of developers are looking for more API standards. And I think, you know, that's for all of the reasons that Shelby mentions there. And another aspect of this, or perhaps another example, is something that we've started to see in large enterprise software organizations. So the Open Data Initiative gets a brief mention in our report this year. And for those that don't know, this is really a joint collaboration between SAP, Microsoft, and Adobe in order to create a common language by which you can describe the various pieces of data that your business relies upon. You know, it's still very much early days, but it's another example of how, you know, if we create a common language, we can actually make it easier for people to take better ownership of their data, make their data a little bit more portable, perhaps, and avoid the pitfalls that both Mehdi and Mike talked about at the very beginning, where, you know, you're having to understand the nuances and complexities of one vendor to another. So I think there's a lot of benefit that can be had here for sure. Taking this example a little further, PSD2 is obviously another API or data standard that's become quite prevalent over the past 18 months or so. For those that don't know, this is the Payment Services Directive in the European Union for banks to open up APIs for account information and payment services. And you know, this is designed to make it easier for third parties to interact with banking services and create more of a level playing field. Anybody on our panel like to jump in and talk about the good, the bad, or the ugly of PSD2? For me, it's an example, but by no means are they doing everything correctly.
So yeah, every year, Mehdi here, I write a report on banking APIs. So PSD2 has been like a major part of all these reports, and actually PSD2 has a lot of drawbacks, right? Has a lot of disadvantages because it's not, the standard is not specified. Companies, let's say we like Europe imposed a regulation, right, without directly giving the tools, giving the culture to companies, giving the time to have enough culture to adopt APIs, right? So because banks have been designed to be closed for the last 40 years, 50 years, right? And even since the beginning, right? But on IT systems have been designed to be closed, and now we're obliging them to open, right? So they needed more time, right? And this is exactly what happened. It was planned to be released in January 2019, and now they asked 18 months, extra time for September 2019 because they were not ready. But on the other side, on the other side, let's say we've seen so many investment in the ecosystem, the fintech ecosystem, so many startups, so many small and medium businesses that now will know that there will be this data deluge, right, from banks' user data. And so thanks to at least APIs that will be open, unified or not, it will be a great question. It will be a question. But yeah, that's a real business incentive to go beyond that, to go beyond just the interface and bring more value for the end user. So the fact that APIs open data from banks, even if it's the governance from the regulation is not great because they didn't push specific standards, they let every bank do their kind of own, right? So integration may be a mess. We see many banks that try to integrate other banks, right, to be a kind of integration platform for all banking, right? So we see like a dozen of banks doing that, doing the exact same thing. So they will compete to developers, right? But so far, for let's say for the business and for the goodwill on the ecosystem, it's really beneficial. On the techniques and the culture, banks wanted to adopt APIs and not just to adapt to APIs, right? So this is why they asked more time, and this is why they waited for a more mature ecosystem and industry ecosystem to really rely on it and to open APIs safely to developers.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Thanks for that, Mehdi. This concept of PSD2 gives us a nice segue into some of the other verticals. We wanted in the report this year to sort of get a better understanding of how APIs are being used in particular app ecosystems or vertical markets. And so Shelby is definitely one of the most well-known thought leaders in the space for healthcare. And I think, you know, the same sort of openness that's been mandated for banking in Europe is certainly on the horizon for healthcare here in the US at least. Shelby, maybe you could give us a little bit of an introduction, talk about the trends you're seeing in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, definitely. So to be honest, healthcare integration is still really difficult. It's an industry where the major players are 40-year-old software vendors, also similar to banking, the federal government, and where policy plays a really huge role, and I'll talk about that. But when we're on the ground actually still implementing integrations these days, we're still dealing with major legacy on-prem, highly customized systems that often use and can only use batch file transfer or even direct database connections to facilitate integrations. You know, if you can do something that's not a direct database integration, you are typically using file transfers over SFTP, typically with some form of EDI format or CSV file. Even though we like to think that HL7 exists, it does, but often hospitals or other healthcare organizations would prefer just to use files. But I do think that there's a lot of reason for hope. Over the past 5 years, there's been a increasing momentum behind both standards and policy pushing for openness. In 2014 or 2015, the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, the ONC for short, basically announced that they were pushing for openness. They were advocating for APIs for any sort of healthcare vendor that was working with the government. They launched the Interoperability Pledge, which got companies that represent over 90% of the market share of EHRs to pledge that they were going to promote interoperability and start having APIs that developers could integrate with. You know, while that happened and it got a lot of good press, we actually didn't see a whole great amount of development in that aspect, which is why actually in the major healthcare technology conference, HIMSS, this year, which happened in February, the ONC announced actually they're going to make actual rules requiring standards-based APIs. And in their announcement, they specifically referenced FHIR, which is the Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources Specification. It's managed by the same organization that does HL7, which was the original data exchange standard from back in the day for healthcare. But FHIR's definitely more modern. It's got some exciting stuff happening. It's JSON based. It's got hypermedia in it. It has extensions and opportunities for developers to develop extensions to the spec. They're even supporting GraphQL, which is pretty neat. We're also seeing OAuth 2 basically emerge as the common authentication strategy, which I'm pretty excited about, which will hopefully just totally beat out LDAP and SAML. So we'll see how that goes. And we're also seeing the major vendors in the space, specifically Epic and Cerner, launching app stores. They did this a few years ago, starting with the App Orchard and for Epic and the Cerner App Gallery. And they did this as part of the ONC's push for making sure that vendors were being interoperable, and it was largely a marketing effort. And what we saw was that it was still difficult to integrate on those app stores. A lot of it still requires things like iframes, and there's really opaque and pretty advantageous to the vendors pricing models. So if you want to integrate with them, you have to do a lot of contractual obligations to get on into those app stores. But hopefully, and as we've seen over the past year or so, that's just becoming more and more open. The pricing is becoming more transparent. We're seeing startups enter the space who are trying to make their own standards or create JSON-based APIs that will essentially act as a replacement for some of these app stores to get other startups and companies just entering the space to be able to integrate more easily. Some of these are Redux and Polkadot, and they're doing some really interesting stuff. And as part of that, we're then seeing the major vendors react to that and try to be more open, develop APIs that are actually adherent to these standards that are coming out with HL7 and FHIR. We actually, even last year, we had one of the major EHR vendors send our company a open API Swagger document describing their API. And that was amazing. That seemed like such a huge step. Never thought I'd see that happen. So if we can see more of that sort of progress, which I think we will, especially with the recent policy changes, then I think that we can expect more open and more innovation with integrating in the healthcare landscape over the next few years.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's interesting times in the world of healthcare. I think one of the topics that we could have covered in a lot of detail here, related both to banking and healthcare, is data privacy and security. Perhaps we'll all get back together again and do that webinar again soon. But I think openness is good for the industry, and hopefully, we'll see lots of cool new innovation. I think it's pretty fair to say that the stresses that exist, the complexity, the frustrations that exist in healthcare, in banking, exist really in any industry. And so to change gears a little bit again, I just wanted to highlight a few of the other areas where we've collected feedback on developer frustration, perhaps the things that they would like to see more investment in or more consideration for in the APIs that they're consuming. Truth be told, we've seen the same sort of results over the past 2-3 years of producing this report. Looking at API description standards here, it's obviously not unusual to see what was Swagger 1 and 2. Now it's the Open API specification in the lead here. OAI version 3, which is the third category along, is still climbing, but much lower in contrast to OAS v2. But there's definitely a pretty broad spread here. Perhaps rather than talk specifically about these description languages per se, Mehdi, you could give us a bit of a briefing on the relationship between API description and API documentation.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because API descriptions or API definitions, sometimes called, are a topic of all the conferences I organize. And let's say in the last year there has been a lot of debate about which is the best one, where is the one that will be the standard and everything, right? So it's interesting, but it's true that many people still make confusion between API description or API documentation. So let's say for an API description is just a machine readable document, right? That will enable other type of software to understand exactly what's inside your API, what are the domains where the API needs to be called, what are the URI, and what are for each endpoint the different input and the different outputs, right? And what are the different, let's say, format of each of them, right? And also you can also describe all the errors that the endpoint will answer if you call them with the wrong inputs, actually. So it's really a document that will enable other type of software to read your API like that. They will be able to generate tooling, they will generate testing, they will generate, they will be able to be integrated into API management. They can generate libraries or software development kit like SDKs, right, or developer portal, right, because the software will be able to understand the API in a machine readable format. API documentation is more than that. API documentation is all the means that you put for someone to integrate your API. So the API reference, mostly generated by the API descriptions, right? So what, like the dictionary of the API is an important part of it, right? It's like the dictionary, you know exactly what's inside API, what are the input and the outputs, the parameters. Yeah, so everything is in there, but you don't learn the language just by using a dictionary, right? You need to be in the right context. So documentation is more than that, is tutorials, is it's specific sample code, it's sample applications that you can deliver for people to begin to integrate your APIs. It's everything you put to make people like completely to have a completely seamless onboarding from the discovery of the API to the final integration. It's about getting started. It's about how do you explain the roadmap of the API, what will be added, what is deprecated, right? So it's a lot more than just just a description. If we would learn language just by knowing a description of every word, right, that would be great, but it's not enough. And last thing I want to share here is that people need to be autonomous when they integrate the API. So the documentation has to give them all the clues, all the tools, and all the pedagogy for them to never need to call support, and so they can integrate 24/7, right? If you achieve that, you can have a complete autonomous integration model where people integrate without never asking anything to a human, to your support, and so you scale integrations in a complete self-service manner. So descriptions are something to describe your API in a machine-readable way. Documentation is description plus everything to make integration seamless by humans.
Thanks, Benny. Yeah, you know, the reason I want to highlight this is because, you know, we continue to hear, well, there's always moving landscape around which description standards, definitions people are using, but documentation is time and time again one of those topics that developers complain about. And so for all of the API providers out there, I think it's just yet another call to action, really, that we can do better and we should do better. And you know, even those that, you know, if we think we're doing all of the right things, there's always room for improvement. So we continue to hear this particular topic. The next one, you know, covers a whole bunch of stuff around, you know, the specifics around API integration. I was going to ask Shelby about event-driven integration here, because although this can be a can of worms, I think you might have some good feedback here for providers.
Yeah, it is definitely a can of worms and extremely frustrating. In healthcare, when you are able to do a real-time integration with an EHR or another software system, it typically is a pub-sub model, and there's no queryable interface where you can check to make sure that you've gotten the latest data. So it's just extremely difficult. It was the bane of my existence for 3 years. And I would recommend providers to make sure that you have a source of truth or a system of record that is queryable. If you are offering event-driven integration, there's just nothing like giving your consumers the peace of mind that they can query and make sure that they do have the latest and most up-to-date information in case they happen to miss something over the wire. and build for resiliency. Make sure that you have retries, that you are, depending on whether the data that you're sending is critical or not, to consider having ways to verify that the data was actually sent and received. For people who are trying to consume event-driven APIs, I would really encourage you to empower the user as much as possible. Let them know, just give them full transparency in a user-friendly way that lets them know why the data looks the way it does, like when was the last time you received an update. Give them the power to reconcile when the data that they're seeing in your system does not really match the data they're seeing in another system that you actually got the data from. And let them handle some of that. There's no reason for you as the API consumer to take on some of that decision-making responsibility when ultimately the user can and should be doing that.
Yeah, I think we've seen some advances here, but it's one of those topics that continues to bubble to the top of the list when we ask developers where their frustrations lie. On the plus side, we've seen sort of authentication and authorization start to decline in terms of pain, which is great. That would suggest that people are starting to standardize more on OAuth 2 and move away from the complexity and nuance of their own proprietary systems. This is a great segue into Mike's section on API design. When asked, there are lots of suggestions that developers provide on how they could improve the experience or adoption of APIs. I'm going to skip past this stat and give the time to Mike to help us understand a little bit more about what we should be thinking about today in the world of API design.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. And I love that stat that you sort of led in with, and the discussion that we were having with Shelby about the pain of event-driven integration. Those are all design challenges when you think about it. Shelby actually just gave all of us, both consumer and providers, a great little mini lesson in how to start paying attention to what the pain points are on the provider side and the pain points on the consumer side. And those are the things you design to. Great companies, as I travel around and talk to companies working on APIs, the ones that do a great job are great at designing, great at paying attention. And one of the big powers of design is consistency. So Shelby talked about this notion, like, how do I know I've got the right things? How do I know I have the most recent information? I didn't miss a message. Getting some consistency into the system is really, really powerful. And that works in a lot of different ways. A lot of the companies I work with are starting to expand. They're starting to add more and more APIs, just like you talked about earlier about how they've almost doubled the number of integrations. That's more people, that's more technology, that's more builds and everything else. So getting fast and stable at creating these APIs means you have a consistent process. You have a model you can work with. So many of the companies that I have been talking to are adopting a kind of a design method or a design process. This is the way we do design here. I've been working with large financial institutions, insurance institutions, even logistics companies, global logistics companies. And one of the first things they're working on is this notion of establishing a design guideline or a design methodology. In the report that we released this year, we talk a little bit about some patterns and practices producing this kind of dictionary, this vocabulary that Mehdi was talking about earlier. We need to know what the language words are. So that's a consistent API design. Producing some kind of visual diagram that shows how the workflow works. A lot of people need a visual sense. Producing some kind of definition of the API. And what's really challenging, especially in the event-driven space, is the open API standard, open API, OAI, Swagger, and those kinds of things. Those work really well for CRUD-based models. But as Shelby pointed out, we have SFTP systems, and now we have these pub sub systems. I'm seeing a lot of companies in their process say, for these kinds of APIs like RESTful CRUD, you need to produce a Swagger document. But for GraphQL, I'm going to need to have an actual vocabulary and a list of the resolvers. For event-driven, maybe I need some kind of protobuffer, Avro tool, or I need a schema definition language. Everybody's going to need to produce some kind of document that will be the consistent sort of source of truth for that interface, and that's really important. And this also touches on that second point in our report about this notion of action-oriented APIs. I think we're moving past this notion of just defining the data. We need to also define what you can do with it, what's possible. You know, Shelby mentioned, give me a queryable interface. What are the actions that I need to get done? How can I update a record? How can I check my balance? How can I add more money to the account? How can I let the doctor approve the transfer of this information to my specialist? These experience APIs or event sourcing, or in the case of GraphQL, like remote data access APIs, or even as Shelby pointed out, hypermedia. These are all ways of putting actions into the API definition set. So we're seeing more and more of this happen in all sorts of places. And that goes to a little bit to what Mehdi talked about, and the idea that you need autonomy. I need to be able to look at your definition and know not just the data model, but also the action model. And I think we're going to see more and more talk about this action model idea in the future, because I need that autonomy, like Mehdi talked about. I need this ability to, you know, 24 hours a day without having to make a phone call, start to do my integration. Often when I talk to customers and they're working on their API programs, we come to this conclusion that we're trying to design a platform or a product that's going to be used by someone we never met to solve a problem we know nothing about. That's consistent design, and that's giving people this action orientation that they need. And the real challenge, as you point out in the integration report elsewhere, is this idea that we're doing more of these integrations than ever. That means we have to reduce the cost and the risk of change over time. The more we get involved with individual APIs, the more likelihood one of those third-party APIs is going to change in some way, and we have to be able to be resilient and survive that kind of thing. So I'm seeing, you know, typical things like forking APIs, what we call versioning. Salesforce has, you know, up to 20 versions currently that they support for their API. That makes it really easy for the consumer. It makes it really hard for the provider. They take all the weight and, you know, and bear all the responsibility. I see other people doing things like really focusing a lot on this event-driven, event sourcing messaging, because it's very simple. It's easy to add more events to the workflow without changing the interface, since it's really just a series of pub/sub events. And that can help reduce the cost or the risk of change. And then finally, building change in using the hypermedia, like we're seeing with the FHIR standard and some other things, using the action descriptions inside so I can change details without having to break customers. So all this stuff, this adopting a consistent design inside, focusing on action-oriented description languages and APIs on the outside, and then reducing the cost of change over time, because time is really, you know, often our biggest element of architecture. Is we use these things for a long time. These are all really big challenges, and I've seen some really creative attempts in these coming years to try to make these you know, a part of your good integration program. And you really, if you think about it more than anything else, what you're trying to do is create Mehdi's autonomy and solve the kind of challenges that Shelby talks about. And we've documented some pretty good examples in the report, and I think that we're going to see a lot more of those in the future.
Cool, thanks, Mike. You know, looking at you know, the world of API design today, I know you've obviously been one of the, like, a key advocate of hypermedia and you know, helped contribute to the community there. There are other things, right? GraphQL, Google's gRPC. We haven't got much of that in the report this year. Where's all of that going?
Yeah, it's great. We only had a certain amount of space, and we couldn't really cover everything. GraphQL and gRPC are both brand new and quite old. So if you think about it, GraphQL is this remote data access control. I want to be able to control the shape of the information that comes back to me. That's a real common need, especially if you have a wide consumer base for a basic set of APIs. If you can offload some of the responsibility for customization to the consumer, GraphQL, OData, RDF, YQL, JSON-LD, these are all languages in the family of giving consumers the power to start to model the responses. So we're seeing more and more of that, and that's because they need action orientation, they need to be in control, and they need to be solving problems that maybe the service doesn't necessarily understand. And that's the same for gRPC. gRPC's been around for a long time. It's remote procedure calling. This goes all the way back to the early 90s when we were trying to do these integrations. And it's the same sort of idea. Give me a function, give me an action element, tell me the arguments that I can pass, and tell me the responses I can get. So I think we're seeing more and more of this action orientation. We're going to see more and more in the future. And the real challenge is going to be able to, how do we give consumers the power to design their own interface, design their own interactions without coupling them to static data models or to static message models that might break or change over time. So I think there's a big mix going on, and what we're all focusing on is this notion of adding more action and reducing the cost of change. I think it's actually very exciting. It's you design differently for each one of these as well, but we're going to see a lot more of it in the future.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just going to take a question from the audience here, and maybe Shelby, you'd like to take this. How would you recommend cloud application providers, SaaS providers, decide whether to build or buy integration into their respective ecosystems, and maybe the flavor of the healthcare space, or really anything at all, no specific industry?
So how would I recommend SaaS providers building versus buying in the API ecosystem?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hard question. I guess it really just depends on the use case and your product. In healthcare specifically, there's still the mentality of projects for integrations and APIs. We're not even really thinking about them as products, much less platform versus product, as you talked about earlier, Ross. And if you're still in the project mentality, you're probably also in the buy mentality. But I would really encourage people to really consider integrations and the integration workflow for their users as a key part of their product. And if that means building, being the best choice in terms of like what's creating the most value and what's the value that you want to own as part of your product, then I think you should be building and not buying.
Yeah, of course, the other angle here is that if you're an accounting company, if you're an expense management company, if you're a CRM, then you should perhaps focus on the things that that really make your product set stand apart. Focus on the value you're providing in your respective ecosystem, and then leaning on experts for integration can also be a really good path forward. As we kind of wrap up here, then I'm gonna pass it to Mehdi to really talk about the future of integration. It's kind of become a tradition, I suppose, for us to look a little bit into the future. And Mehdi definitely has his finger on the pulse of the API economy. So maybe you can help us, through to the finish line here in the last 2 or 3 minutes. And just a reminder, whilst Mehdi's talking to the audience, if you've got any final questions you'd like to get in, please shoot them over to us and we'll try to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. It's a great responsibility, right? No, but in few words, I will just say that the API economy, so a mix of integration, governance, management, and exposition, is ready, right? So that's my final point. It's ready. The tooling elements are ready. Either integration platform as a service, like Cloud Element, to integrate third-party APIs into your system. Right, there is a safe market for that with great products, and they are ready to be integrated into IT department. Right, internally it's ready. Internally it's ready because there is many API management tools, testing, designing, monitoring, securing, discovering. So there are many parts of what we call the pillars of API management of the API lifecycle that are covered, right, by a sane and developed tooling ecosystem, and also the exposition, right? Developer portals, monitoring tools also are kind of ready. So the tooling set is ready on the whole integration, management, and exposition chain, right? And when you expose it, it will be to be integrated in someone else's system. So your exposition is another people integration, right? So the skills element are ready. So we see more and more like change in human resources. We see more product managers becoming API product managers, product owners to become API owners to manage the whole API programs. We see some ops becoming API ops, right? The specific operations for API. We see API designers. We see API evangelists internally to evangelize API practice. We see API architects, so architects specialize into the work of designing APIs for the long term. So on the human part, it's also ready. It becomes to be really ready. And the last one is really culture, because everything begins with culture, right? Strategy eats culture at breakfast, so the culture element is really important to develop what I call the API mindset. And the API mindset is a lot of words, a lot of ideas behind that, but it's really to be API driven, put APIs at the core of the IT and product development, building APIs before building applications, before building the website, before building the clients, what we call API first. The API mindset is also like designing APIs from the ground up to be externalizable, right? As Jeff Bezos did in their Jeff Bezos mandate, right? So it's about API governance and thinking that one day internal services could be exposed. So we need to make APIs that are ready to be open. The API mindset is also thinking beyond just API facades, right? Defining an interface contract that if respected, will enable to refactor technical debt, decouple monolith, because like that behind the interface, you will be able to decouple into smaller services, right? Not breaking clients, right? And finally, the API mindset is also about thinking APIs as product, right? So designing and building APIs to be delivered and implemented internally, but increase business breadth for internal product managers, or monetize externally in a more business context, either directly with revenues or either with integration and B2B development, right? So for that, the API mindset, you need also to think in terms of customer experience, but also developer experience, right? So API first, API culture, API as a product, developer experience, API facade. So all of this consists into what I call the API mindset. And so it's not about technology, it's not about a specific architectural style or a specific IT project or any transformation, right? Strategy. It's about like really thinking about the interface before thinking the implementation, and leveraging all the internal energies to make company think bigger of their own walls. What some economists call the extended enterprise, right? So how you can be bigger because of people integrate with you, so they work on your assets to expose them to their own market. So the technology is ready, the tooling are ready, right? The API lifecycle tools are ready. The skills, right? The skill set is ready. More and more API positions inside companies, right? And let's say the mindset is ready now. If your company is not, there's a lot of people to help you in that way. But yeah, this is coming, right? So APIs are coming for sure, and API integration.
Awesome, thanks, Mehdi. There was one final question I think just weaves all of that together really nicely from the audience that says, what experience or thoughts do you have with regard to motivating clients to adopt an API, either within their organization or beyond?
This is Mike. I'll sort of make a suggestion. This is a question that seems to come up a lot in integrations for enterprises. We seem to be working fine. Why do we need to adopt this, or what's going to be the big benefit for this? The things that I'm seeing pretty consistently are adopting these APIs actually, for the most part, opens up new avenues, new business models, new market spaces, and new opportunity zones. And when designed the way we've talked about here, using the kind of integration patterns that Cloud Elements talks about, you can actually do this at a reduced cost or at a reduced risk. You can do this while you continue your organization. Often you don't need to focus so much on transforming what you already have. What you want to focus on is acquiring something new, acquiring new opportunities. And often those new opportunities, as Mehdi has pointed out, are really going to be API based. They're going to be API first, API culture space. So not integrating, not having this sort of API space is going to actually put you at a disadvantage in your own market. You're going to have competitors who may get ahead of you to adopt more of these APIs.
That's a really great point. It's a really good point. Well, we've reached the end of our time today. If there are any other questions that I haven't answered directly, and there definitely are a couple, please go check out the report. There's a bunch of other content in there that covers additional topics that we didn't discuss. So please look out for that. API security is definitely one. The slides and recording, as I mentioned at the beginning, will be available for you ASAP. All that remains is for me to thank Shelby, Mike, and Mehdi for all of their help this year putting it together. I really appreciate it. And for everybody else, please share your thoughts and feedback on Twitter and use the State of API Integration hashtag. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. And we will talk to you again soon.